Well, welcome back, guys, to Borderline Genius. I think this is episode 11 now, so we've well and truly cracked the double figures, which is fantastic. But by way of introduction, if you're jumping on or listening for the first time, my name is Andrew. I'm an Australian-based game designer based in Melbourne, Victoria. This is one of my little creations here. I'm officially licensed by our Australian Football League. And soon coming is a Marvel, officially licensed Marvel game in a few weeks, which I'm super excited about. But it's great to be here with Ryan from Seabrook Studios, a fellow Melbourne-based game designer who we've met on the circuit in the last few weeks. So, Ryan, fantastic to have you on the show this evening, mate.
Thanks for having me. And speaking of getting into double figures, well, you've done this, a couple of weeks? A couple of months, maybe? It took me playing cricket, I think, from the age of 8 or 9 until I was 19, I think, before I achieved double figures batting. I was terrible at batting.
Yeah.
But I got there in the end. I was 19 playing grade cricket, and the captain was like, just so bad, you can just open the batting every single week until you get better. And I eventually did.
Well, what a lovely little baptism of fire that your captain sent you in for.
What's that?
What a lovely baptism of fire from your captain. Was that seen as a blessing or a curse, his mandate to you?
I think I was nervous at the time. I think generally as a batter, when I was younger, I was quite small for my age. I was terrified of the cricket ball.
Yeah.
It was nervous, but it was just like, there's no point in putting you last because you're either not going to get any practice or you're going to get out straight away. Might as well give you a chance.
Yeah.
To get some practice. And if you get out, it doesn't make a difference. So there's no pressure.
Mm.
And I eventually did get better. My high score was 63.
Fantastic. Well, you have to tell me about your high score of 63 now that you've mentioned it. Walk us through that innings.
There's no story there. I did eventually get better through practice.
Yeah. What did that... This is a great way to start, actually, a very appropriate way to start, given your game that you've successfully kick-started lately.
Yeah, you had your boxes for the games that you're working on. Mine are all up on the shelf out of the way. This is what's coming out soon. It's being printed now, 10 wickets.
Absolutely.
I'm a plug.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we'll certainly dive into sports games because I know that's not your only sports game that you've done, and that's certainly an area of overlap for both of us, which is really cool. But even just like from that whole release of pressure, right? Like I know we're talking about a cricket and a sporting example, which everybody tuning in who's a tabletopper might think, how is that relevant to tabletop gaming? But walk me through even like just what that did to your mindset, basically, where you were told that there's no pressure on you, basically, right? Like everything's a bonus. Don't be too hard on yourself. What did that do for your skill development, your enjoyment, and then ultimately the results that came with it?
I'd say it was a change of tack from when I was under 14s or maybe under 16, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, we've established that I was a terrible batter. And we were playing a game, we were losing, and I came in to bat, and I think I scored like 8 or something before getting out. Yeah. And the coach had to go at me, like, for not helping them win the game.
Okay.
And I remember my mum was furious at the coach. It was like, you guys are number 11.
Yeah.
Blame the people 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 if you're going to blame anybody. Yeah. But these are kids.
Yeah.
It's like pressure is just not required at that level of like sport for teenagers who are mostly having fun.
Yeah.
Or should be.
Yeah, 100%.
But I don't know, it was a long time ago. Like to pick particular emotions around how I felt. But I did get better.
Spot on.
I didn't complain, so I must have supported it.
Yeah. I just think it's a really interesting one, right? Because I know that in my full-time work with Swiss, we're very lucky that we've had a mindfulness coach work with us who's also worked with the Richmond Football Club. So another overlap with sporting. And she talks about what she was able to do with Richmond in particular about mindset and how in the moment, how can you reframe your mental script to basically not have any pressure on yourself, right? Or for that to basically be the objective. And like they certainly yielded the fruits of that mentality since with winning 3 premierships in 4 years. And I think that it's an interesting one, right? Because even before a lot of big games, this is all public knowledge, you'd see them more in the huddle, and rather than Trent Cotchin, the captain at the time, for anybody especially who's listening in from overseas and has no idea what Australian football is, everybody starts in a huddle at the start of the game, quite similar to American football in that regard, I guess, but that's the only area of overlap between the two sports. And rather than giving all the team members like a big jeer up and a big, we're going to go and smash into them today and get fired up, they tell a joke. And that joke was there to relax them, to kind of take their mind off the fact that, this is a high pressure environment. It's just a game. Let's go out there and have fun. And what, they won 3 premierships in 4 years or something like that, right? Their list is probably tapped out now since, and they'll go through their rebuild. But yeah, I just think how we put pressure on ourselves or how we relax through pressure to achieve a pursuit and to achieve something and to develop a skill is even an interesting thing that's, we can reflect on from a game design perspective as well, right? Because, we all have expectations, or we all have goals getting into this pursuit. But sometimes if we put too much pressure on ourselves, whether it's getting funded from a Kickstarter perspective or going into a big play testing session or ideating on what's next, the pressure can be crippling, which ultimately detracts from the output, but then also the experience as well.
I think that ties back into the cricket story and the comment you said about pressure on going into a playtesting session.
Yeah.
Like, playtesting is practice, is getting better at design, getting better at a particular design that you're working on. I mean, you will always have high hopes for a game because you want it to be as good as it can possibly be, or as good as you within the parameters that you're defining for it. And taking the pressure off and saying, it's a playtest. I'm going to learn something from this. We'll work out what that means later on is necessary to make sure that you're still enjoying the art of making a game.
100%. Yeah. How do you do that in particular? Like, kind of relaying that kind of pressure situation. Like, was there a specific moment where that mental script flipped for yourself because you didn't have a coach saying, take the pressure off? You had to be your own coach in that environment? Or is that something that's always come naturally to you in a playtesting environment specifically?
I don't know if anything's ever come naturally for me. But so I spent, 20 odd years doing software development, but there was a point from 2010 onwards where I started to work with a company that focused on iterating, prototype, and research.
Yeah.
So not assuming that they knew the answers.
Yeah.
And validating that through building something as fast as possible and then getting it into users' hands to find out whether or not those assumptions they held were actually true.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that's what made the step back into games, and in this case into board games for the first time, easier for me because the step from tried computer games in the past, but the step into board games was I still had this vision that I was going to do digital games.
Yeah.
But digital games take a long time to make. They take a lot of effort of people involved in producing them. And I wanted to get better at developing a particular aspect of it. So, all right, well, let's just take this one part and build a physical prototype for it. And then iterate on that and then take it back into the digital game. And they never went back into the digital game. They just became board games.
What a wonderful pivot, to use an overused cliche out of the COVID saga.
Yeah, it was also the point where I realized that it's possible for not small, but a person working in a small team or by themselves to actually not necessarily make a profit, but to make a profit in some cases, but even just to generate revenue, which is very difficult in digital
Absolutely.
games. I mean, the ceiling is much higher because you've got the ability to scale.
Yeah.
In board game, every copy that you want to sell, you have to print. But the expectations of the market, people are willing to pay for things, to pay for board games.
Yeah.
But digital games is a bit of a race to the bottom. at the moment, and that makes it a really
Okay.
hard market to compete in.
Yeah. How'd you find then that learning curve? So you kind of come into tabletop almost by accident, but then you've discovered that like the economics, the willingness to pay, I guess the consumer profiles are very different. How did I guess you navigate that learning curve to welcome the industry as opposed to necessarily be intimidated by it?
Good question. A lot of reading, a lot of research,
Yeah.
a lot of 18 Holes, which is the first game I published.
Hmm.
It was, like many games, I guess. I'm making assumptions of how other people come up with games, but
Yeah.
an idea for a game. A friend was visiting; they liked golf. And I thought, I might have an idea for a golf game, and we'll get to this
Hmm.
at some point. But I like sport games that are not simulations of
Yeah.
the sport.
Yeah.
Um, my favorite analogy for this is Formula One racing. So there's
Hmm.
dozens, scores of racing games out there, and
Yeah.
the the people who play best of them are people with fast reaction time. So
Yeah.
they tend to be younger people, people who can have the time to practice, and then the people who have equipment. But a
Hmm.
Formula One driver actually needs incredible neck strength to be able
Mm.
to resist the G-forces, just to hold their head up straight while they're going around.
Mm. Mm.
That doesn't really feature in any of the digital games. So
Mm.
every digital sport game is a lossy simulation.
Mm.
Once we accept that the simulation is going to be imperfect, then let's strip out all sorts of weird and wonderful things and to find an interesting take on that particular sport.
Mm.
And so that's what I did with Helm Wickets, and that's what I was originally looking to do with 18 Holes. You make a prototype, you play test it, it doesn't suck. Parts of it do suck. Parts of it were
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
You keep chipping away at it and getting feedback like, there are too many tiles, it's hard to build the course. So you work out ways to make it easier to build the course.
Mm.
You just keep working on that until I'm thinking of drifting away from the original question now.
No, it's good though. It's
That's
really
what
good
it was
insight.
around. The industry is intimidating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, there's probably a bit of Dunning-Kruger effect in that, where I didn't know enough, so therefore didn't think it was that complicated, and
Yeah.
then just went into it. And then as
Good.
you get
Yeah.
deeper into it, you're like, "Ooh, it's expanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so much here. It is way more complicated than I thought." But I think I used the lack of awareness as a confidence boost to think that I could
Mm.
actually
Mm.
do
100%.
this.
Yeah.
Though the very first Kickstarter was a failure for 18 holes. I went, cancelled it, went away, did more research, come back 9 months later to do a more successful one.
Hmm.
There was a point after that, I had that decision point of whether or not do I stop now, or do I come back and invest a little bit more time, energy, money
Mm.
in order to find out whether or not those new assumptions I had about why this will succeed were actually true or not.
Mm.
It was true the second time around, so I did actually meet the market's needs.
Mm.
So I guess a lot of research is probably the recurring theme here,
Yeah.
which often can be how I start doing a board game. I was like, trick takers were popular.
Hmm.
I was working on some trick takers, and so I went and looked at 110 different trick takers and
Mm.
chunked them up into what made each one unique, how they dealt with a bad deal, and, how did they cover scoring, how did they cover um, uh, uh, variations to whether or not you must follow, how do they deal with trumps, all that kind of thing. And then you look at like all of these games, and then you start to do a gap analysis on that to go, all right, I can see that there are little gaps here.
Mm-hmm.
between these various games, is there enough of a gap to slide another game in there?
Mm.
So
How do you make that assessment? Like, there's no textbook, I guess, that says that the gap is material enough that a market exists for this. So how do you kind of back your judgment in, or what proof? You spoke about proof points before. Like, what proof points do you need to ascertain whether, yeah, the gap is big enough to commit effort and resource to it?
playtesting is one.
Yeah.
So if it resonates with enough playtesters, then you can start to feel confident that there is something here, which is very
Mm-hmm.
different from marketability.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoyment is, well, this is an enjoyable game. Would you buy it? No.
Mm.
They do very separate things.
Yeah.
So if you get the game in front of enough different groups, you can validate whether or not people will play the game. And now it's a question of whether you can market that. If you're pitching to a publisher, you only have to market to them
Yeah.
and their perceptions of the market, which is not always easy because their perceptions will be different to your perceptions. So I had a game
Yeah.
that was had a very specific look to it, and when I pitched it to a publisher, they're like, that look says family game, rule complexity in your game doesn't meet our definition of a family game, so therefore we're not interested.
Yeah.
But in terms of, is there enough of a gap in there to slide a game? I mean, there's always enough of a gap to slide a game. Is there enough of a gap to market, release the game? I don't know the answer to that question because that particular game is still with like half a dozen publishers at the moment. So
yeah,
maybe not.
But I think there's a really interesting insight there that there's a different threshold, right? That is something enjoyable, and then is there a market for it? And I think, as you said, like, your way of assessing that is robust play testing, diverse play testing, not just with a particular audience, but using your industry knowledge, using your contacts with publishers or whatnot to make a call, right? Because fundamentally you're still committing time, energy, investment potentially down one particular project versus you've got a number of different projects on the go. So I think that even, that's probably a nugget for our audience to take away, that we'll all have our different ways of how we assess that, right? Because there's no numbers that we can crunch into a model that says, yes, we have X here and Y here and Z here, and multiplied all together, bang, we have a scalable game. But it's just, when you're doing your analysis and your critique, think about, is somebody willing to pay for this as opposed to just, is this fun or is this enjoyable?
When I do research or playtesting feedback for games that I'm looking to take to market, I'll usually ask the question, if you saw this on a shelf in a store, what's the sticker price?
Yeah.
That was a fun one when I was playtesting 10 Wickets so I'd be up late. The company that I used to work with had a whole bunch of offices in India. So I'd be organising like late night. So the playtesting would start at 11:30 at night in line with their would be the end of day.
Yeah, kind of 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, right? Depending on daylight saving over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'd be tired. We'd play a game. And at that point, it was a longer game. So it's usually like half an hour to 45 minutes. With the teacher in there as well. And you get your feedback. It's all right, how much would it cost? And they go, oh, yeah, it's just a bunch of cards. 400 rupees. Which is like $8 Australian to buy this brand new game. And I'm like, I can't print and ship that game to India for $8.
Yeah. Heartbroken.
Can we have a different price?
Shattered.
But their perceptions of how much a game is worth is based on the market in India, where card games tend to be that, like, 2-deck of card that sits on a coat hook kind of thing.
Yeah.
Made in India, and you can buy a deck of Uno for like 99 rupees.
Yeah.
Like $2.
Crazy cheap prices over there. Yeah.
And so therefore, all prices are different.
Yeah.
If, though, this is where I learned the difference between a card game and a board game in consumer mind. Card games in India, 400 rupees, 500 rupees. Board games, normal price.
Interesting.
Because they're a large box, they have things that are not cards inside them. They're often imported, though more and more games are being manufactured in India. Like European games, and now factories are starting up in India to support the growing market there. So how your game looks in terms of like component types will influence what the customer thinks the price is. And I mean, it used to be board games, big boxes, lots of shelf space.
Yeah.
Until shipping became very, very expensive, and then people were like, maybe we don't need all this air inside of our boxes that we're paying for.
How did that even find, I guess, the development of 10 wickets thereafter, right? So there's almost like, I guess that there's an insight there with a specific market that then you have to make a creative decision as to whether, I guess that's an insight that you take on board or whether you park it for later. So how did that feedback, I guess, then influence the next step that you took with 10 wickets? Something like, I can see the packaging behind, right? And it looks bigger than a game that is designed to sit next to Uno on the shelf.
Things, I don't know what those boxes are called. I mean, this is a telescoping box, but I don't know what that box is called.
I call it a hang cell.
A hang cell,
okay. Basically, yeah. But nice. So I guess how did that experience of getting that feedback from an overseas market end up informing not just the gameplay, but I guess those components that you talked to, right, to essentially validate value?
So I'm a big fan of different components. Sorry, if things are on cards and they're different things conceptually in the game, then those cards should be different sizes. There are times when it's economical to make them all the same size and then just have the players sort them out. But I like it when things that are different are physically different on the table. So I wanted the wicket cards to be different size to the run cards. So in this case, I used poker cards and tarot cards, and that's just going to be more expensive.
Yeah.
But it contributes to table presence and just an easier to parse game when you have these things being different sizes.
Yeah.
That, of course, meant that it was going to be more expensive for me to print and ship this to India.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I really wanted to sell this game en masse in India, then I would, find a factory in India and get it manufactured there, and I would make compromises for that particular market. I think it's reasonable to make an addition for the Indian market because they have different perceptions on how much things would cost. And if it's mostly cards, then you're competing against that in that market, whether you like it or not.
Correct. Yeah.
In the end, I could never find enough. I could never crack the market, essentially. I could never get enough traction in that market to say, I'm going to be able to sell enough copies here to take a punt on it. I don't have the spare capital to just print a couple of thousand units and ship them to India and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, mate, and for everybody listening in, this is the third or fourth conversation that we've had now. First one, of course, is being recorded. One thing I really like, even though we're just getting to know each other, really, one thing I really like your approach is it's so analytical and it's very deliberate and strategic. You can tell the choices that you make, and how I probably reinterpret that in my own words is you gain an insight. If I want to crack India, this is what I need to think about. But then it's almost like, what has to be true? What has to be true for me to crack India? And then is that something that I want to chase or not? And in this case, you know what? I'm going to park it for later. So hence my immediate design choices or compromises I would have to make. I'm also going to park that for now as well. So it's in order to take on that feedback, the assumption to be true is that you can crack India. And in order to crack India, you need to have both a scalable supply chain that gets your costs down and you need to have proven revenue channels that are willing to take a punt on it, which you'd probably need to rely on strength of relationship in order to get it into the right retailers, be it bricks and mortar or e-commerce, in order to make that happen. So it's like, well, you know what? In order for this vision to come true, feels a bit of a stretch for now. Okay, I'm going to pivot away from India, and hence maybe I'll take on board some of the feedback, but not all of the feedback. Is that a
Yes
fair
and no.
assessment, do you
So in
think?
this case, I am taking a punt on India.
Okay. Oh,
I'm
great.
grabbing a couple of hundred units
Yeah.
and sending them there to
Yeah.
fulfill via Amazon in India.
Wonderful.
So my
Yeah.
research has, once again, research looking at data into
Yeah.
Amazon is that most people, when they're buying board games, will buy from Amazon, or they'll
Great.
buy from one of the very few number, but slowly starting to grow now, Indian
Mm-hmm.
board game retailers and publishers.
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out to a couple of different publishers there. I either got no response or people who just said, look, sorry, no, we're trying to develop our own games and we're going to go that way. Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I tried running ads at various different price points,
Mm-hmm.
including like free shipping, which was bananas because I'm in Australia and I can't. Free shipping is the cost of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, if I do that for a couple of days or a
Mm-hmm.
longer period just to see whether or not my price points are even getting interest, so I can look
Yeah.
at I'm running ads in various parts of India and this much at this price point.
Yeah.
And I can see all the way down to how many people added into the shopping cart.
Mm.
Okay, so 10,000 people have seen it, one person added to the cart. So something's not working. So is it
Yeah.
the copy? Is it the image? Is it the price point? Is it the shipping? So change all these numbers around, go up and down, left and right, keep adjusting things, and see if anything changes.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't find any success there.
Okay. Okay.
So if I can't find success running ads, but those ads, of course, are limited to particular advertising networks, which might not necessarily be the right place to advertise.
Yeah.
If I can't crack a publisher and I can't afford to just have a go,
Mm-hmm.
in the end, I was like, you know what, I can set aside a couple of hundred units. You need to have a registered company to sell on Amazon in India, but I have a friend who has a registered company in India, so we're going to explore that part of
Fantastic.
renting that company off him in order to run the store and do that, and then just see what happens. And it either sells those couple hundred units or it never does, and then I categorically learned.
Absolutely right, and that's your vision of success and your risk appetite accordingly is very different for that project as to what it is selling into markets where you have a greater understanding of, and that's a strategic punt that you've still thought through. You thought through the trade-offs of it. You thought through what has to be true for it to work and what the consequences are if it doesn't, and it's a calculated bet, which is great. Yeah. When you say the ads as well, even like help educate our audience, because you mentioned there, mate, how there's a number of different avenues you can go down with ads to, I guess, get the eyeball, so the 10,000 number, but then ultimately drive the conversion, which hopefully is greater than 1 out of every 10,000. Appreciate that every different market is different, and probably for every different game it's different as well. But I'd love your thoughts on that with how do you effectively test the different mediums to get an understanding on what was, like in terms of like, is it Facebook, Google ads, Amazon advertising, whole heap of other stuff that
Never done Amazon advertising. Facebook was good for a while, but then once people got privacy, then Facebook ads became a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
I've tried Reddit ads as well. Terrible conversion, and from what I've heard since then is that Reddit conversion is generally pretty low.
Okay.
I was going to try Twitter as well, but it was just like too expensive, and I don't know. I don't find the ad delivery of Twitter to be very good. The things that it serves me versus Facebook seems to be quite good at serving up things that
Mm-hmm.
are interesting to me, but
Mm-hmm.
the things that I'm interested in are ads that kind of match the kind of games that I'm selling. So I don't know how effective those actual ad campaigns are. But generally speaking, I think the 10 Wickets is a relatively cheap game.
Yeah.
And the acquisition cost on Facebook would be too high to really do
Okay.
ads as a mechanism. 18 holes, which is 10 Wickets is a $30 game. 18 holes is a $90 game.
Okay.
The $90 game performs much better on Facebook ads.
Yes. Yeah. And I suppose for everybody listening in and watching it who's not familiar with Facebook ads, right? Essentially, that CPA, that cost per acquisition, fundamentally higher priced product, $90. You can afford that cost per acquisition to be a lot higher, and the sale to still be profitable fundamentally, right? As opposed to a $30 item, you just got less margin to play with. So if you're looking at CPAs of $15 or more, suddenly, depending on the shipping arrangements that you have and percentage cuts that the website might take, if anything at all. I know Shopify take a commission on each sale. Then the economics, unfortunately, can get pretty slim pretty quickly. Yeah.
So, don't know where that'll go in the end for 10 Wickets, but we'll see. It's still being printed right now, which is, not quite the right timeline that I wanted. There's a World Cup starting in India in 3 weeks' time. That would have been a lovely time.
Of course, that would have been very good.
Being delivered
to
India, at least to test the waters, but
100%. Well, I guess it's good. At least it's good with 2020 comps now, with there being a World Cup every couple of years, I guess. So, not in India grand. So I don't even know where the next one is, but hopefully that means that there's always going to be kind of key milestones as to why a sporting game is going to be relevant.
Yes, and the 18 holes are the same. There's 4 majors every single year, which gets the broader golf aware or golf interested cohort engaged. I mean, there's golf all year round, but most people don't care. The 4 larger tournaments, it's like tennis. Tennis is played all year round, but the 4 majors, that gets everyday people interested in those particular tournaments.
100%. I'm really keen to go back, mate, to something that you mentioned before to do with 18 holes. Hey, you said that you had a failed Kickstarter, but then you went away over 9 months and you took some systematic learnings out of it. I guess had some inner belief that made you want to go back to the well and do it again, and then ultimately it bore some fruit. I think that's a really interesting case study, right, of a perseverance, of inner belief, inner confidence, being open to change, being flexible as well. So yeah, I'd be really keen to understand, as you reflect back on that, what learnings did you take over that 9-month period to fundamentally fund successfully second time round?
I ended up giving a little talk. The company I used to work with, they would have internal conferences a couple of times a year, and I did a talk on 33 things I learned doing my first Kickstarter. One of the key ones was understanding that different people need different information to make a purchasing decision.
Sure. Yeah.
And if you want to maximize the conversion rate, I guess, is you have to provide each of the things that people want. So some people want a nice infographic explaining what's in the box and how to play the game.
Yeah.
Some people want a how to play video. Some people want videos made by people who aren't associated with the campaign. Even if they're a paid preview, it's somebody else who has distilled the game down, and generally they have some thoughts and feelings about the game at the end. The game is for people who like these kinds of things. They don't need to say anything negative about the game. They can just say, if you like these kind of games, then you'll like this one.
Yeah.
Some people want to see the print and play files. Even if they never use them, they want access to them. some people want some concrete information about how much it's going to cost to ship. As an
Mm.
Australian, I understand that. There was a couple of other pieces of information that people needed to see, and some people wanted the rule book as well.
Yeah.
So if you don't include one of those, you will turn away some people because
Yeah.
they need that in order to make a purchasing decision.
Mm.
So I had provided a couple of things,
Mm-hmm.
nowhere near enough.
Sure.
So I went
Okay.
away and I got each of those other things.
Mm-hmm.
And that was done by looking at successful Kickstarter campaigns, pulling apart their pages and
Mm-hmm.
understanding, not what necessarily was the content that they had, but why did they have that content there and why did they have it in that order?
Mm.
Did they do it because, well, that's what everybody else did, or did they do it because they needed to show something at a certain point?
Mm.
Showing the contents of the box is usually pretty common to put at the top because people want to know what they're getting.
Mm.
I personally don't look at the videos of
Yeah.
Kickstarters,
Sure.
but I know that lots
Yeah.
of people, you must have that video if they're going to be interested.
Mm.
Fair. So that was one of the primary things I learned.
That's a great summary as well. How did you? Because it feels like I often oversimplify decisions with is something an and, in which case I need that and that and that and that, or it's an or. You can go that way or you can go that way. When you reflected on all those 33 things that you took out of Kickstarter and the things to do differently, it just feels like there's a lot of ands, right? Like different people make different need different information to make different purchasing decisions. I'm going to cover all bases in order to make sure that everybody has a key component that they need. How did you then go, I guess, distilling in much the same way that you've just explained the key highlights now? Like, how did you go distilling what you then thought was a key priority versus what was more on the nice to have scale, knowing that you did a lot of analysis to then understand what's the really comprehensive checklist of things that I need in order for this thing to work?
I guess this comes to a conversation about resolution.
Mm-hmm.
You can always have, or I guess the conversation is about fidelity rather than resolution. So, one of the things that I realized I needed was, a video about the game itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could do a high production value video, or I could do a just me talking to the camera, which is what ended up what I did doing for 10 Wickets,
Mm-hmm.
or I knew someone who could do voiceover. I knew someone who knew how to assemble video into a recorded session and do some animations.
Mm-hmm.
I knew someone who could source sound effects, and we put together like a how to play 18 holes in a. What are the interesting parts of that?
Mm.
That wasn't very expensive. A bottle of red wine here. A bit of money for your time there. And I produced a thing that was sufficient. But you can always make a better version of that. Find that, and perhaps the next version along, I would get increasingly more conversions based on that. But eventually, there'll be as you increase the fidelity or the resolution of the particular thing you're doing, you're not necessarily getting the same ROI because you've satisfied the primary thing of, do you have a video where I can learn enough about your product?
It's a binary choice in that regard, right? Like there's no incremental benefit for incremental cost in that specific example.
I think in that specific example, 0 to 1 is the biggest.
Yes.
1 to 2 is pretty good, but 2 to 3, 3 to 4, you're dipping away there, and those that increased niceness in your video.
Yeah.
Are you necessarily going to get that return, especially if you spend a few $1,000 on that video?
Correct. It's a diminishing return curve.
Yes, that one.
Yeah. fantastic insight, right? 'Cause I think that like it's very easy to boil the ocean in a way, right? But then understanding what's going to yield the greatest benefit and what the cost thresholds for that as well, right? It's just like a really pragmatic lens that we need to take on board.
Yeah. We've barely even talked about sport games at all.
I was just thinking that, right? And for everybody listening in, there are so many other topics we thought that we could really dive into, but we also promised ourselves an organic chat, and I think that's the way that it's really gone, which has been great. Ryan, at about this stage, I normally ask our guests, and I'll do the same thing, whether you have a question for either myself, the community, who I can ask the next guest, or both. So, yeah, have you got a question at all for myself, somebody
I don't
else?
think I
Or...
properly understood this when you sent the stuff across today. This is a question that I have for you.
Yeah.
Well, the question I had for you was actually I got answered a couple of weeks ago when I asked you about your journey into licensing. So I've achieved that one.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for the next guest,
Mm-hmm.
we never actually got through all of my tedious and amusing origin story, but there was a particular point back when I was doing digital games
Mm-hmm.
where when I was a young kid, I'm going to say 12, 13, there was a couple of computer games that came out, either Beholder 1 and 2 that I played
Mm-hmm.
on the family computer that essentially ostensibly became mine. Possession is not the law.
Yeah.
And when my mum bought that computer, we didn't really understand the impact of buying, in this case, point in time, a 286 computer, which is probably meaningless information for everybody listening. Anyway, what happened was within a year of that, it was effectively obsolete because those chipsets had, when they wanted to do maths, they had to do the maths in software. All subsequent chipsets had a special piece of hardware that would do maths for them. And every single game from about 1992 onwards made the switch to, well, we're not going to do this in software because there is a dedicated chip to do that. And so this computer that we bought, it was less than a year old, was already obsolete, and we couldn't, we'd buy games, and then we realized that we haven't taken them back to the shop because they don't work on this computer. Okay. They're never going to work.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I was like, well, when I make games, I'm going to make games that can be supported by as many devices as possible.
Yeah.
So everybody can play the game, not just people with the latest hardware.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. It's just cost prohibitive to do such a thing, as I would later find out. I was working on this digital game, and so we had this build process that would just generate dozens of permutations of binaries for this particular game on 3 different operating systems, and then all the various, like whether it was 16 or 32-bit back then, the different chipsets that Apple used to have, whether it was the Intel or PowerCC, and then a whole bunch of like Linux distributions and chipsets. And it was just, for a game that never made it to the market, it was a waste of time.
Yeah. So many components, right? So much complexity.
So my question is, what's something from your past that has shaped the way you think about how things should be done, for better or for worse, and how has that influenced how you make games now? It influenced
Fantastic
me, but
question.
I managed to break myself of that noble cause, but one that I cannot fund myself.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And fantastic context setting there as well, right? With just, the magnitude of those components, right? And then how you've taken that to influence the type of games that you're making now, which, apart from 18 holes and 10 wickets, we didn't really even get into all your other projects on the go, Ryan, as well. But just for the audience's benefit, before I kind of summarize what some of my key takeaways are, help us understand all the different stuff you've got on the go now at the moment as well, in addition to the games that you've also brought to market?
Right. Well, everything that I have on the go. Well, I have a partner. I have 2 kids. Um, one day a week I spend with my kids when they're not at school.
Yeah.
I have. I'm starting a new job next week, which is 4 days a week. But previously, I was spending 1 day a week on board games. So things at the top, published or signed. These are the games that are in progress at the moment. With down that end, apart from Little Succulents, in pitching now through various stages of development. They're the ones that are physical prototypes. And also doing some research on a platform to try and help self-publishers understand some of this complexity about doing it all yourself.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different aspects of the self-publisher one, but there's also the publisher investor relations side of things as well. Having used enough investor relation portal from various publishers, there are some are good, but most are absolutely terrible. And many publishers don't have a way to lodge submissions such that if one person from that organization gets sick, wins the lottery, and then just quits the next day, the submissions process is stuffed. This is the key person risks. And I don't know, there might be a thread about whole de-risking things that come through the various topics that I've talked about.
Yeah, for sure.
I generally have a very low risk appetite, and that comes into how I think about these processes and what we should be doing about them. If these were my businesses, I would be concerned.
High single point sensitivity, right, with that inventor relations liaison, because fundamentally they're the gatekeeper into the organisation. So if that one gate becomes permanently locked or that one gate becomes broken, then the pathway into progression basically gets shut off then, right? From which, as you said, is
there have been publishers that I've been talking to, and this person quit last week, so we're scrabbling to work out where everything's at, and we'll get back to you. And you eventually they eventually get on top of it, but they are set back weeks and months trying to pick up the pieces and then recruit somebody and have them pick up the pieces, and everything's just an email chains. I don't think I can necessarily solve all their problems, but I'm doing research right now to see whether or not people are experiencing these problems that I perceive. So, once again, going with, I have some hypotheses around where the pain points are. Let's go validate these before we build anything.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I reckon we've got time for one more question, because I reckon that's an interesting thread just to dive into really quickly, right? A little bit off script again for those who have watched all episodes 11, where normally the recap happens after the question, but you can only see from that, right? Busy family life, new job, mix of self-publishing and through Kickstarter, approaching publishers, a lot of games on the go, research projects on the side. I guess, how do you determine in any given week whether you're moonlighting or whether you're 1 day a week that you've allocated with board games? How do you determine what gets your focus and prioritization? Because it can be very easy to lose the rudder, right? Which then in turn, going back to kind of our first thread, then you lose the passion, you lose the interest, other stuff gets in the way, things fall over. And
I'm pretty good at eating the elephant, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah.
Just one bite at a time, for those of you who haven't heard that expression.
Yeah.
But in terms of how I organize my time, so my partner is doing her second master's at the moment. So she's has been studying for the last year and a half, and she's about to start a capstone project. And so she'll have a number of nights of the week that she has a job as well. So which days we're working, and then she'll have certain nights that she's going to be working on her study. And so I'll know in advance, all right, I have these days set aside, and then there'll be days that we will spend with each other. Our kids, they go to bed at 6:30, 7 o'clock every night. We've managed to get that down, and they stay asleep pretty much all the time until 6:30 the next morning. And then from there, it's like, all right, well, how do you keep momentum on something? That is tricky. And often I find it's important to have, what is the goal? If I'm publishing this myself, it's a very different goal to, am I pitching this to somebody else? You've got this tension where you want it to be good enough, but no better. The publisher is probably going to want to influence some aspect of the design after the product. And therefore, if you overinvest in that, you will have generated waste. But if you don't do enough work, then you won't be able to successfully pitch the game. So that there is this wonderful tension here. It's a beautifully designed game, amazing tension of just how much work do I need to do to get it over the line, and then because work will happen after that, whether you're involved with it or not. Or if I'm going to go to market with this myself, it's, do I have enough play tests that satisfy my objective for the game? Am I trying to make a 10 out of 10 game? Am I trying to make an 8 out of 10 game? Do most of the playtests run to a certain length? Can I get people to come back and play this game again? Well, people ask me to play this game, even though it's a prototype game, which is a very important metric. If I'm not getting that, then looking at the playtest results, trying to feel out where the issue is. Sometimes you've got to feel that out. Trying to understand how the balance has affected the way people play the game, which if you then identify it is balance, you can go crunch those numbers, but you've got to get a feel for why are people playing the way they are. So then, those things which, if you have time allocated, then there's one more thing that I do. Sorry. When I'm not at my desk, I learned this when COVID hit. I used to work in the city, and it'd be like an hour and a bit on the train each way every day. And I would use that time on the train, standing up because the train's crowded, to think. Think and prepare for when I sit down, I'm going to do these things. And so then when I sat down, I could just start typing, or drawing, or whatever it is. And I didn't get to the point where I sat down, and I sit down and go, all right, now that I'm sitting here, what am I going to do today? That's already been solved. In between moments, when my kids at swimming lessons and not actively swimming, just mucking around in the swimming pool, well then now is the time to do some thinking and think about what am I going to do when I sit down. So when COVID hit, I lost that train time. I lost that thinking time. And I had to work out where else am I going to get this. So I sit down at the computer. I'm ready to go because I always have a thing to do. That's a part of it. I mean, it's probably more complex than that.
Oh, I think that's the crux of it, right? And I think that there's a saying that one of my old managers used to say. It's like, plan the work, then work the plan, right? It's integral to have a plan. Like, we're rudderless if we don't, and we have a lot going on with our games projects. We have a lot going on. Games projects is just one component of our life. You picture our life as a whiteboard. It will occupy a fraction of that whiteboard, which is where we have a lot of other stuff, right? So you have to be super purposeful with how you use that time so that you get results and fulfillment what defines fulfillment for all of us is very individual. But I love what you said before. Have a goal, have an objective, and then work out what do you think. Like, do the analysis. And some of us are more analytical than others. Some people who are watching and listening in will be a bit more about. We'll go based on feel and emotion. I feel like doing this today, or I have more energy to do this than I do that. If it works for you, great. But always be assessing, right? Always be making sure that there is some method to your madness, because especially if you are self-publishing, all of our timelines are self-imposed. So if you're not working to a goalpost, it's very easy for the goalpost to shift, and it's very easy for us to never meet those goalposts, which ultimately then leads to unfulfillment, because on some level we'll want to bring our game to market, I would think. There will be some level of that drive for us all. And unless we're moving methodically towards that goal, yeah, that's where things can get challenging. I would assume. It would for me, personally, that's for sure. And I think, Ryan, it would for you too. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, mate, I think we've been going almost an hour. So again, I think our timing was pretty spot on, which it could go somewhere between 45 and an hour. I think for me, just to kind of recap on some of the key threads that we spoke about, we started in a really interesting place with pressure. But I think that the pressure has probably circulated nicer than what we've been talking about at the end, where having a plan for play testing, but going into a situation where your mindset can govern what you get out of it. If you go into a play test putting yourself under already part of the journey, a pitch with a publisher, a timeline that you're imposing on yourself, and you have this idea of putting yourself under a lot of pressure, it's just a really negative mind space to be in. And I'd probably encourage anybody watching and listening in to think about what a more constructive frame up for that mindset could be. Maybe some of us can, through pressure, make diamonds, but taking the pressure off in some ways to then enable you to be at your peak performance, so that when somebody has a critique at a play testing, you're seeing it as a positive, you're seeking to understand why that's the case. You're not necessarily, getting defensive and bottling it up. But then kind of spoke to after that how your really interesting journey with how you came across tabletop design. And originally it was a part of the process to better enable prototyping digital games. And then you realise, crap, I can do a whole venture around this as well. And that a lot of your probably strategy to not be intimidated by the unknowns was to embrace the fact that, hey, this is new, so there's probably some things I don't know, and that's okay, right? Like, that's okay. I'm going to give it a crack. So again, attitude and mindset really came into your 0 to 1 with how you kind of got started. Then also really purposeful research, and we kind of tapped on the fact that your approach, even now as you talk about how do you set up your week and how did you use that train time, your approach is very analytical. I think a lot of similarities to myself, where I ask what has to be true, like what has to be true for this to be successful? What has to be true for a 10 wickets game to work in India? What's the risk threshold that I'm willing to absorb by giving this a crack? Is my goal there going to be the same as what my goal will be in Australia? So that kind of ties that thread together with understanding what the objective is behind what our launch strategies are. So I think that, that's an approach that I would really encourage everybody to do. It does come more naturally to some of us than others, but having a plan and at least understanding what has to be true for this to work, and having a vision, right? Understanding what am I actually trying to achieve here? Is it to sell 100 units and say, hey, great, I'm a games publisher? Is it to have an overseas hit? Because if that vision is very different, then fundamentally what has to be true is very different, and then the game plan has to be very different there afterwards. We spoke a bit about pricing and components thereafter as well, and how a card game, I know, unfortunately, as much as, the IP for this, I think the effort that's gone into this is very similar to what's gone into this, right? Like, these two games sell at very different price points, and a lot of it is because of the different components, the different size of the packaging. So again, for everybody thinking about the economics of this industry, take that into consideration. And again, I thought you shared a really useful perspective on if a part of the game has a different objective or a different goal, use different components to illustrate it. And you spoke about the tarot card versus the poker size card example there. And And lastly, the learnings that you took out of your Kickstarter. Different people need different information to inform that purchasing decision. So again, I'd encourage everybody to think about who their target market is. Do your research to understand what type of information do you think they need in order to make that purchasing decision. Because ultimately, we need revenue to keep this venture going, right? Without the revenue, we end up sitting on a whole heap of product or a whole heap of time that we've used for questionable benefits. So, thanks for being so open with sharing a lot of really key insights this evening, mate, that I think our community can get a lot out of.
I just looked up how diamonds are made in the lab, and I think it still requires pressure.
It still requires pressure?
Yeah.
So there's
I
still
was
some
hoping that
out there, right?
metaphor couldn't be used anymore, but unfortunately it's still made with pressure.
Still made with pressure.
Yeah.
Better than the charcoal, right? That it probably would be otherwise if it wasn't. But thanks again, as I said, mate, for sharing so openly. Heaps of gold in there. For everybody who's tuned in, again for episode 11, thank you. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already. Please hit me up with comments, questions, feedback. Yeah, that's the one. Tick. Comments, questions, feedback. What you'd like to hear more of, less of. Really want this to be the start of the journey, and I'm really enjoying producing the content. So I hope that for those watching and listening in, that you're enjoying it as well. Look forward to seeing you next time. We'll hopefully have the next episode up in the best part of a week. Take care and see you then.